Hello, we are live. Welcome to a virtual visit with Alan Zweibel. My name is Isaac Lanford, and I'm happy to have been asked to serve as the moderator for this program that has been put on by the JCC of Indianapolis in partnership with the Jays of Dallas, Houston, Miami, and Rochester. I would like to tell everybody watching this that we do want you to participate. Feel free to type in questions, and we will get to them as the show goes on. I know people will want to talk to Alan, and I'm excited, and I don't want to take any more time talking before we get to him. So, could I please now read the introduction? An original Saturday Night Live writer, Alan Zweibel has won 5 Emmy Awards for his work in television, which also includes It's Garry Shandling Show, The David Letterman Show, and Curb Your Enthusiasm. A frequent guest on all of the late night talk shows, Alan's theatrical contributions include his collaboration with Billy Crystal on the Tony Award winning play 700 Sundays and the off Broadway play Bunny Bunny, Gilda Radner, a sort of romantic comedy, which he adapted from his best selling book. All told, Alan has written 11 books, including the 2006 Thurber Prize winning novel The Other Shulman, the popular children's book Our Tree Named Steve, and a parody of the Passover Haggadah titled For This We Left Egypt, as well as a field guide to the Jewish people, both of which he co-wrote with Dave Barry and Adam Mansbach. Alan's humor has appeared in such diverse publications as The New Yorker, Esquire, The Atlantic Monthly, New York Times op-ed page, The Huffington Post, and Mad Magazine. He has also penned a best-selling ebook titled From My Bottom Drawer. Alan has received an honorary PhD from the State University of New York, and because of the diversity of his body of work, in 2010, the Writers Guild of America East gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award. Alan is currently preparing his play Bunny Bunny for a return to New York stage. His cultural memoir, titled Laugh Lines, My Life Helping Funny People Be Funnier, was just published last month, and a new feature film called Here Today that he wrote with Billy Crystal, starring Billy and Tiffany Haddish, is scheduled to be in theaters later this year. Ladies and gentlemen, Alan Zweibel.
Hey, Isaac, how you doing?
I am good. How are you?
I'm great, thanks.
Thank you for joining us.
Oh, this is my pleasure. Usually under ordinary circumstances, I would be going to each of those cities. Rochester, I've been a lot. My friend Andrea Miller, always love seeing her there. I love going to Miami and, of course, Indianapolis. I've been to a few times. But under these circumstances, I'm happy to be able to do this with everybody.
Yeah, it's nice how people have been able to adapt to the circumstances, and we are here together, and so that's cool. And I wanted to tell you that I was able to read a copy of the book Laugh Lines, and couldn't have come at a better time for me. And I absolutely loved the book. I was a fan of yours, and especially I've always been a big history nerd for Saturday Night Live, and it was just a terrific read. I burnt through it pretty quickly sitting here in the house.
Well, I really appreciate that. What's happened, Isaac, is that because we're all going through what we're going through, people are looking to a book like this as a diversion, take their minds off of everything else for a couple of hours and get a few laughs out of it. So I've been very grateful. The book's doing well, and it's a weird time. It's a weird time to be promoting a comedy book during a pandemic. It's a weird confluence, but making the best of everything, like everyone else.
Yeah. I wonder, as a writer, how much has that actually interfered with your daily routine? Because you're typically writing from home, aren't you?
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful question, because on the face of it, nothing has changed. I wake up in the morning, shower, do all those things, get dressed, right? I leave the bedroom, say goodbye to my wife, walk down the hall, maybe 6 feet, make a right turn into my study, and I spend the day there. So that's a lot changed in terms of that. But, and I found this with most writers, on the surface, you go, okay, this is a good time for me to focus and to concentrate and can get a lot of writing done. Somehow, some way, the days just fly by. I wake up 5:30 every morning to do exactly what I said, to write. And for, you watch CNN and that gets depressing. So then it goes back to, Law and Order, SVU. And I've seen those, so those are depressing. And before you know it, it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So most everyone that I know, they're having a little trouble with focus. Like I said, yeah, it makes sense. Hey, we have all this time to write, but how about yourself? With what, your act and things like that.
Yeah, I've had a much harder time. I'm used to being very busy and having a tight schedule and being on top of it with more room in that schedule. I'm forgetting calls and it's been a lot bigger of a mess for me. It's same as you're saying, I sit down at the computer and a lot of time goes by and I realize I didn't really accomplish a whole lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's odd in that way. Reading the book, I admired, because you talk several times in it about the 5:30 a.m. and going in every day. That's a lot of self-discipline that a writer has to have to maintain when no one else is telling you to get to work.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, when you're working on a TV show, when you're working on a movie, or you're working on a play, and you're actually in production, or there are built-in deadlines, you go, okay, it's just like in college, you had to study for a test. And so that forms your discipline. But when you're not, if I'm writing a book or nobody's expecting it, I have a play that's a Broadway, but now there is no theater. The movie I just did with Billy is in the can. We're ready to show it, but there are no theaters, okay? So what I find what I've always had to do is, if I'm not working on a TV show or have to report to a movie set where, okay, the sheet says you have to be there at 6 a.m, do you act accordingly? I've always I awakened at 5:30. It was just something I started doing when the kids were home, and young enough, and I'd wake up before the house woke up. I'd take my first break when I could drive them to school, and then I'd come back home and I'd continue my work, So each writer has their own discipline. I know writers that work through the night. They start at midnight and they go until 6 a.m, and then they go to sleep, and not all writers sit. I know writers who stand. They have like a lectern, and the computer is on it, and they stand and they write. And there's one very famous writer in LA, David Milch, who created Deadwood and wrote all those great Stephen Bosco shows like Hillside Blues and all of that, Street Blues. He lies on his stomach. There's like that. And that's how he does that. If you saw the movie Trumbo, Dalton Trumbo, who was a blacklisted writer, he wrote Johnny Got His Gun and some wonderful movies. They showed him writing. He was in a bathtub filled with water, and there was a plank across the top of the bathtub leading from this side to that side, and his typewriter was on it. So I have no idea how he got to decide that was it. I don't know what the bad attempts were. I don't know if he went into a closet first. I'm not going to do that. I don't know. Maybe the shower. No, the typewriters. I don't know. But yeah, each writer has their own method.
Yeah, the bathtub would be a lot more dangerous in today's age of the laptop, I think.
Yeah, they're really ugly.
Yeah, I definitely, nighttime for me, because I've got young kids, and so I do the opposite. I can't get up at 5:30, so I'm definitely 1, 2 in the morning when I sit down and get going, you also, yesterday was your birthday, is that right?
Yeah, yesterday I turned 70.
70.
I have no idea how that happened. I have no idea when that happened. But, just like in the book, I was 21 and graduated college and started writing jokes for comedians who worked in the Catskill Mountains. They paid me $7 a joke. I did that for a couple of years while I was slicing locks and God knows what else in a delicatessen. And then when I got a job on SNL, that started in 1975. I was there 5 years. So if you do the math, then when I left SNL, it's Garry Shandling show. a couple of movies, a couple of TV series that didn't do so well. Then Broadway with Billy Crystal, and 700 Sundays, which is the play I co-wrote with him, and 11 books. So if you add it up, and you add up the fact that my wife Robin and I have been married 40 years, we have 3 children, 5 grandchildren. Yeah, it takes that long to do those things. But, you know, when I was growing up, maybe it's the same with everybody else. You know, when somebody was 70, my grandparents are 70. Yeah, okay, I'm a grandfather, but I'm not hunched over. I don't have a little spit coming down the side of my face. I don't sit on a park bench feeding pigeons all day. So I don't know how this happened and when it happened, but here we are.
Yeah, and when you talk about your body of work over 45 years, I'm somebody who I was familiar with a lot of what you had done, but reading the book, I was actually surprised to find out some of the other things that I wouldn't have known that you were attached to. I grew up in the country. I didn't have cable. And so it's Garry Shandling's show was something I had to go back and watch as an adult. And you had your fingers in a lot of the iconic comedy that has shaped modern comedy in America. Do you think that, am I saying hyperbole here, or can you with confidence agree with what I just said?
Oh yeah, I've been really fortunate that way. Look, you can't, when I graduated college and I started writing for the Catskill Comics, that was very much establishment kind of comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Old Jewish comics in tuxedos on nightclub stages. They all had the same hair. I think they all shared the same set of false teeth, okay? And they were just pure joke tellers. It was the establishment. Then when SNL came along, it was anti-establishment. It was like the sons and daughters of those guys. Now it was our turn to do our version of comedy. It was the George Carlin era. Okay, it was Mortzall preceded a little bit, but you know, there was 2 clubs in New York City, one called Catch a Rising Star, another one called The Improvisation. And I used to hang out there instead of the hotels after a while, because the new guys, at that time, the new guys were Richard Pryor, my buddy Larry David, you know, Bette Midler, Lily Tomlin. They were closer to me in age. They were a little older than me. But, you know, they were talking about Woodstock, and they were talking about Vietnam. They were talking about Nixon resigning, okay? So, yeah, that was more my sense of humor. And so I was with SNL for 5 years after I auditioned for Lorne with a book of 1,100 jokes. And I had my meeting with him, and I gave him the book of 1,100 jokes. And he opened the book, he read the first joke, and he gave me a job based on one joke. Okay, that's how smart he was. He just was looking for sensibility. And the first meeting we ever had up at SNL, Lawrence said, this is going to be a comedy variety show, which meant it was going to be a variety of different kinds of comedy. Okay, some softer voices, some louder ones, some you know, macabre, some just out and out funny. So yeah, so that was groundbreaking, and I was lucky enough to be there. Years later, when I was introduced to Garry Shandling, we had the same manager. He and I met, and Cable was just starting
Right.
To do original comedy at the time. Up until then, you know, look, there was ABC, CBS, NBC, that was television. There wasn't even a Fox network. Okay, so Showtime had, okay, all this stuff, and they needed programming, and they left Garry and I alone. They just said, give us a show. They had faith in the 2 of us. So we were able to do something which was cutting edge at the time. So it was second time for me. And having partnered up with my buddy Gilda Radner when I was with SNL, meeting Garry and working with him was like lightning striking for a second time. And so what Lorne had late night, and I was lucky enough to be a part of, I was lucky a part enough to have met Garry, and we did it with Cable. So yeah, I guess I was there at part of that frontier, if you will. And then Letterman, when I wrote for Letterman, he was already established, but David was doing to the talk show format, what SNL was doing to variety, and what Garry and I were doing to sitcoms. And if anyone saw 700 Sundays, which was a one-man Broadway show that I wrote with and for my friend Billy Crystal, which was about his life, about his mom and his dad and his extended family. We broke a couple of rules there also. For those people not familiar, 700 Sundays was a play that Billy had me write with him. He asked me to write with him, and I jumped all over it. Billy's dad held down like 3 jobs, worked 6 days a week. Sundays was their day. His day to be with dad, to go bowling, go to a baseball game, go to the beach or whatever. And his dad died suddenly when Billy was 15. So he calculated that he had roughly 700 Sundays. And we did that, but when we started, and, it was advertised, Billy Crystal, Broadway, 700 Sundays, no one knew what the title meant. So they figured, okay, I'm going to go see Billy Crystal in concert for 2 hours, not knowing that at intermission, they would call their parents or their children and say, I love you. There's something I want to come back and see with you. So, I was lucky enough to be part of that, and that broke a couple of rules also. So, I say in all modesty that I've been very fortunate.
Yeah, one of the things that I love in the book is you tell these stories of these partnerships with other comedians, and I don't know if it was intentional completely, but it reads very much like a romantic relationship. It's very intimate. It's the meeting, the falling in love, the fights that happen along the way, and then the beauty that comes out of it as well.
Yeah, you're 1,000% right. Like starting with Gilda, it was a platonic love affair, okay? We had, I wrote for everybody on SNL. I wrote The Samurais for John Belushi. I done a ton of Weekend Update because joke writing was my forte.
Right.
Got there. And I created characters for other people. But with Gilda, we made each other laugh a lot, and I fell in love with her. But it was platonic. Those were her rules, okay? And I've always felt anyone, especially when you're really young, not 70, I never, with any platonic romance, I figure, okay, there's usually one person who doesn't want it to be platonic. But, all right, if these are the rules, I'll live with them for now. But one day you'll open your eyes and see the glory that's in front of you. So that lasted 14 years. So there was the, not only the boy-girl part of it, and that lasted Gilda's whole life, the platonic thing. And it lasted. It lasted. We left SNL after 5 years. She moved to California. I got married. I stayed here in New York. And the last show she ever did was its Garry Shandling show. She came on as a guest, and she had cancer at this point. And she felt that she was wavering at first, saying, maybe I shouldn't do the show. She didn't think that anybody would recognize her after so many years of being away from television, like 6 or 7 years, and she looked different. Hair was shorter and all of that. But then she said, I got to do your show. She says, my comedy is the only weapon I have against this thing. She asked me if I can help her make cancer funny. And so I helped my platonic friend, and she got nominated for an Emmy for that episode that she did. And even when she got real sick, when they thought she was in remission, and she wasn't, I went to Cedars-Sinai Hospital in LA to give blood. And I'm lying on the gurney, and a nurse comes and gives me a pad and a pen. And I said, what's this? And she said, well, Gilda likes to know whose blood she's getting. Write something nice. She's having a tough time. So I wrote, dear Gilda, I knew I'd get some fluid of mine into you one way or another. Said it pretty nicely. But that was like a love relationship, which Garry Shandling, the same thing. Anytime there's a partnership in writing, it's a very interesting thing. I don't know if it's been your experience, Isaac, but both people have the same sensibility where you make each other laugh, but it's a little bit different. Okay.
Right.
So that provides the synergy of 1 and 1 equaling 3. The alchemy is as such where the product is something that neither of you could have done alone. And I think what happens after a period of time, especially if you're writing with somebody for that person to say what the two of you are writing, it becomes strained. And it had nothing to do with ego. I never wanted to be in front of the camera. What it was is that, you know, ultimately, at best, you're vice president. At best, because the guy you're writing with and for, he or she's the one who has to say the words. And if they can't do it with conviction, it's going to come out bad. They're not going to say there's going to be fraudulent. The dialogue won't work. And when Garry and I broke up, you know, there's a word that you usually use with in a relationship. When we broke up, it was because after 4 years, we had different lives. I was married, had 3 children. I wanted to write about the fact that I was the commissioner of our son's Little League, and we almost had to move because the other parents were pissed off at us, okay, because I rescheduled the rain out, okay, during the Blickstein's bar mitzvah and stuff like that. I wanted to do that. Garry was playing himself, a comedian using his own name and talking about not being able to get a date. And I just dried up. Yeah. As inventive as that show was, I dried up. I started resenting that I couldn't flex different muscles. He started resenting that he knew that I had lost my focus. And when we were done with the show, we weren't talking. We were living in LA. We had a home on the East Coast and we were back East. And my wife saw that summer that Garry was appearing in Atlantic City. She called him. She said, I'm bringing Alan down. I'm putting the two of you in a room. And if you don't come, you're not coming out until you're friends. You've been through too much. And we did that. And one of the reasons I wrote the book, Laugh Lines, is because writers are lucky. You know, I grieved when my buddy Gilda died. And I wrote a book called Bunny Bunny, Gilda Radner, a sort of love story, which is this. And I didn't want it even to be published, but my wife Robin said, gee, your best friend died. You haven't even, you know, mourned yet. You haven't cried. So I did this, okay? And writers, once again, are lucky. You can access memory and you can, it's cathartic to revisit and put it on paper. So that stayed with me. And when I made it into a play, and now it looks like it may be Broadway bound, if in fact it is going to be a Broadway in the near future. Right. There was that. And with Garry, we were starting to mend our ways. We were starting to have, get our friendship back. And he was a complicated guy, but I pursued him. And I accepted the fact, just like I accepted the platonic thing with Gilda. All right, Garry, if he returned 1 out of every 3 phone calls, I was fine. I didn't care about the 2 that weren't. The same thing with emails. And I was out in LA writing the movie with with Billy Crystal Fahey and Tiffany Haddish here today. It's about 3 years ago, I guess. And I was working with Billy Crystal on the script. Garry called and wanted to get together and have dinner because like I said, we were starting to mend the road between us and we couldn't get it together. Something fell out and it didn't work. And I had to leave for LA the next day. So we made up that we would speak that Thursday night. Well, Garry died that Thursday morning. Yeah. And it was the same thing as it was with Gilda. Yeah, Gilda took a wider turn. She had cancer. And so it was a different kind of experience. Whereas Garry's was more sudden, you know, but at the same time, it was the death of somebody that I loved. And then the writer, once again, was able to access memory and to express it. Judd Apatow through. He produced a memorial for Garry out in LA. He asked me to speak. I flew out and we all told Garry stories, you know, Sarah Silverman and Kevin Nealon and Bill Maher and myself. But the reason I wrote this book, I didn't want it to be just a chronicle. Oh, and then I wrote, and then I wrote. Garry and Gilda, all of a sudden there was heart. There was emotionality. And those are the kind of writing that I like the most. So the other stuff, yeah, the fun stories about SNL, the fun stories about writing for those comics up in the Catskill Mountains, you know, and all the fun things along the way. And, you know, the book also has some of the foul tips. You know?
Right. And I love that because it's honest.
There's an honesty to pour your heart into a movie only to have Roger Ebert review it and use the word hate 11 times, you know, but the guts, the emotional pull with Garry and Gilda, I wanted to, and the book does have that. So I said, okay, fine, I will write it, because that was something I was able to tap into.
Yeah. I think I know the answer to this based on your work, but do you think that comedy is better with a partner?
Yeah, yeah, I hate to say it. And the reason I say I hate to say is we think that, look, certain things, when they're personal visions, are meant to be done by yourself. Okay. I've written novels by myself and children's books by myself because I felt I needed to get inside a character and see the world through that character's eyes. And I best do that alone. That being said, when you write with somebody else, it becomes social. And there's a built-in editing process, and where you write something and the other person makes it better and you make it better. It goes back and forth like that. It's part of the process. And it's, you know, if it's so much easier than doing it by yourself and being alone. TV is collaborative. You know, you have a writer's room that maybe has 10, 11, 12 writers. It's social. It's pizza at midnight. It's going around the table. Who's got a better joke on page 9? So, and when other things that I've written, whether it was Gilda or Garry, Martin Short, when I wrote his Broadway show with him, certainly Billy Crystal, Larry David on Curb Your Enthusiasm, it was, you know, I've been writing a lot with Dave Barry lately. You know, he's I'm sure the folks down in Miami certainly know, you know, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning humorist. And when we've written 3 or 4 books together, and he tells a story, which is true. We were collaborating on a novel we wrote called Lunatics, where he was a character and I was a character who are having a feud. And so we alternated chapters and we built on what the other person presented us with. So I'd send him something on a Monday. He'd react to it and write his 3 or 4 page chapter. I'd get it by Friday. And then it was my turn. And one time I sent him my chapter and he called me up and he said, listen, your chapter is really funny. And we made a plan, we made a pact that we weren't going to edit each other along the way. Okay. We would just go for it. And when we had a book, then figure out where the tweaks were. He called me up. He said, listen, your chapter is really funny, but we have a problem. And I went, what? He said, you killed all of our characters in your chapter. He says, I don't know who to use. I don't know who's going to do anything. So I said, okay, fine. If you're going to be that way about it, it's the way we did my chapter. But there was something fun and funny about it. And I think that there's a certain excitement, and you put it perfectly, Isaac. It might have a lifespan of, whether it's long or short, it might have all the beats of a love relationship, the initial attraction, the excitement of finding each other. Hey, we're the same, making each other laugh. Okay, let's do it. Look what we've done. And then it plateaus a little bit because it becomes a bit of a routine. And then on the downside, you know, it could crash and burn, or it could just slide to a stop. But it does have that arc to it.
Yeah. You talked about the gathering of the memories, and when do you know it's time to write a memoir about your career? Because while you're writing the memoir, you've got a movie in production, you've got a play that's going to go back to Broadway, and certainly more ideas in the hatch. So are you gonna have to add extra chapters to be in later publications?
I would hope to. Well, it's like I alluded to before. I resisted writing a memoir because a memoir is about remembering. And when we look back at our lives, we tend to choose what we want to, or emphasize what we want to emphasize. And we, downplay other things that doesn't fit our story. So I try to be as honest as I could about it, but it was more about memory and as opposed to creating. So that's why I resisted it for about 4 or 5 years when people asked me, you should tell your stories on paper. It's interesting. Yeah, you were fortunate enough to be on the cutting edge of different forms of comedy, and you've got funny anecdotes. But I resisted it for that very, very reason that you're talking about. I didn't want to just remember the time that I would put it in a book. Maybe I can write a movie. Maybe I can write a pilot, or even if it's just a couple of, short stories for the New Yorker, Then I looked at my idols, and here's another way I've been fortunate, very, very fortunate. Carl Reiner, Mel Brooks, Larry Gelbart, that old group, okay? Norman Lear, my good pal Buck Henry, who died this past December. They were all in their 90s and still working, still writing. Buck died, he was 89, but he was still writing. And I realized that, okay, maybe you can do both. Maybe you can take a breather to look back a little bit. That doesn't mean you're still not going forward. So it's a little bit of a balancing act, but that's a wonderful question, Isaac, because it's you usually think of, okay, I'm real old. I'm wearing a smoking jacket. I got all the money I need. I'm smoking a pipe. There's a fire behind me. I got brandy. I'm going to lean back and tell my memoirs. No, it doesn't work like that. When you're a nervous Jew like myself, you wake up at 4:30 instead of 5:30, so you can take that extra hour to write something new.
Nice. Now, if it's all right with you, Alan, we've got a few questions coming in here in the chat from the people watching. You might recognize this first one. This is from a Lindsay Zweibel Till, and it says, "Love you, Dad, more than you will ever know."
That name, I don't recognize. It's up. We have 3 children. That's my beautiful daughter, Lindsay. I don't know how she got on this thing, but hi, Linz. I mean, Lindsay, I talk about in the book.
Yeah.
When Roger Ebert eviscerated me with that review of the movie North that I had written, Lindsay was a little girl. Lindsay was born in 84. She must have been 9 or 10 when the movie came out. And I was so devastated. I had given the power to people like Roger Ebert to just take a swing at me, and I let it land. And I was younger, and I became very self-indulgent. And Lindsay got tired of looking at her dad just lying on a couch and eating a lot of Haagen-Dazs. And she said, she was a little girl, she was 9 or 10. And she said, "Dad, if I give you some advice, you promise you won't punish me for what I say?" And I go, "No, baby, say whatever you want." She says, "You sure you're not going to punish me?" I said, "I'm telling you." And she said, "Fuck him." Okay. Lindsay said, "Fuck him." And she says, "You're a writer. He can't write. What are you doing? Do what you do." And, and that's the kind of wisdom she's always had. So, hi, Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. You gave us another few decades of comedy from Alan. We've got Lev from Indianapolis here who wants to know, are all comedy writers as disciplined as you are?
In their own ways, they are. Okay. I became very disciplined because I knew, having ADD, I needed something to keep me from going off the rails. Okay. Whether or not they wake up 5:30 and do the discipline, everyone has their own. In general, the most creative thing any writer does is figure out reasons not to write. Okay. It's looking for diversions. Oh, I never see that movie. Oh, I liked him. Oh, they opened up a new thing. Oh, yeah, I'll get back to the writing later. And now with the internet, you can get lost in it for hours and days and sometimes years and never be heard from again. But if you want to churn out material and you self-impose your own deadlines, and you make whatever your own discipline is. So the answer is not by nature, Lev, but we pretty much are back. We have to back into it.
Yeah. Marcy Levitt wants to remind us, I think we already know Alan, but she wants to let you know that Miami loves Alan.
Oh, I love Miami. That's in Florida, right? Isaac?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love going to Miami. Like I said at the outset, I love going to Indianapolis. I love Rochester, and Miami is they put us up at a place called the Betsy, some hotel on South, I guess it's South Beach, but it's nice down there. Really like it. My friend Dave Barry lives in Coral Gables, so we always see him when we're down there. But I love going to Miami JCCs.
Yeah, Adrian wants to know, can you tell us more about the origins or beginnings of Samurai? Would it have worked as well without John?
Well, there wouldn't have been any Andrea without John. It was his character, and he auditioned with for SNL doing that character. All right? It was his. It's not like somebody said, oh, what if you walk into a men's shop and the tailor is a samurai? That didn't happen. How it happened was John had the character. A writer named Tom Schiller wrote Samurai, what was it? Samurai Hotel, okay? And with Richard Pryor. And it worked really well, okay? It was a hit. But they thought it was a one-shot deal. And like I said earlier, before I got the job on SNL, to supplement the great living I was making, getting $7 a joke, I took a job in a deli, and Lorne came up to me, just walked by my desk, and I was a writer, me, Al Franken, and his partner, Tom Davis, and he said to me, you worked in a deli, right? I said, yeah. He says, okay, then you think you can write Samurai Delicatessen? I went, you bet, boss. He walked away. I had no idea what that meant. I didn't have clueless, but I wrote it and it worked. We did with Buck Henry, and then there were 8 or 9 more afterwards. But could have worked without John? Well, specifically, no, because it was his character. In general, he was so unique, Belushi. He can raise an eyebrow and make you laugh. It would have worked, but probably differently.
Yeah, one of the things about the Samurai that I always really liked is that to do that many sketches of the same character, there were still always small bits that were new each time that were added in.
Well, that's really, really perceptive, Isaac, because when I would write it, I would try to put in new moves so it wasn't a repetition of the same thing in different places. And there was one time, because we had censors on the show. Like I said, there was only 3 networks. So for us to get something on the air and expand the boundaries just a little bit, we had to have a certain degree of cunning with them when we spoke to the censors. And with John, in one of the Samurai sketches, Buck said something that John thought was an out and out lie. It just wasn't true. And so what I had John do in the script was take the sword and make this motion with it, okay? I said, John goes up and down with the sword in the sheath 3 times. And we all know what that meant.
Yeah.
Okay? The censor, a very nice man named Jay Otley, we had a talk. We had a meeting. See, Lorne was the ultimate guy, who dealt with the censors or the standards and practices if we couldn't handle it ourselves, if we ran into a roadblock. This never got as far as Lorne, because I remember me, Buck Henry, and John, and this guy, Jay Otley, talking about this move. And he said, 3 times is just blatant. And he said, just once. I said, wow. You mean you only have to do this once? And he says, keep me out of it. And we did it once and it worked really well.
Wonderful. All right, we've got John Dreyfus from Houston asks, can you tell us a little bit more about Garry Shandling?
Garry Shandling was a genius. I think that I learned more about writing from Garry than anybody that I've worked with, and I've learned something from everyone. I not only will I say that Garry had minions. He had not the kind of minions that you have at the JCC. This is Minion. He had people who he taught, devotees of him. He used to have a basketball game on Sundays, and whoever was in town, he used to go and play. He had a basketball court at his house. So it would be Ben Stiller, it would be Judd Apatow, it would be all these writers and comedians. And Franken played in a bunch of those games. And let's say the game was called for noon, I'd get there, let's say 10-2. There was already a dozen of the younger people, the younger writers. Sarah Silverman played those games, who would be listening to Garry as he talked about writing. And then when I would leave after the game, and they would still stay there an hour later. And there was a writer named Ed Solomon who went on to write Men in Black and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Same thing. Learned a lot about writing from Garry. Garry was very spiritual. Before people were into crystals, he was into crystals. He had a log cabin up in Big Bear in California, where he used to go. My guess is he smoked a lot of pot, but he was also very, very into energy and whatever. And his complications arose from the fact that he didn't have anybody really in his life. He had a brother who died. He had a mom who made him crazy. His dad had died. He didn't have, like I said earlier, where we had our split, he didn't have a wife and children and a family. So his work was his family. That was his entire life. So me and other people who came after me when he did Larry Sanders Show would resent the fact that, at 4:00 in the morning on a Sunday, Garry would call and ask about an edit that you made in a show that you edited. And say, Jesus, I could have handled this call at 10 in the morning. Why at 4? And when Garry passed, and like I said, that Judd had that memorial, yeah, we all told Shandling stories. We all told Garry's jokes, which were way, way too pornographic for even this. In between the comics, the funny people were Buddhist monks. There was video of him in robes, okay, with incense and sitting in a lotus position. And we all got the feeling that if there's a life after this, Garry was ready for it. He was pretty uncomfortable with this life. And that's where a lot of his humor came from, him being the odd guy. Brilliant, but a guy who really didn't fit in that much.
Yeah.
I hope I answered the question.
No, I think you did. You gave us some. I just watched the first part of the HBO documentary, the Zen Diaries, and which I saw you in. And sure. Yeah, wonderful. I'm looking forward to the second part. So I would tell John Dreyfus, if he can, to check that out as well if he wants to know more about Garry.
Yeah, John Dreyfus. What you'll find in the second part of it, and when Judd sent me a rough cut of both parts, and I called him, I made this observation, and I think you'll see it, Isaac, and John will, is that I likened it to, there was an HBO documentary about George Harrison called Living in the Material World. Part one was about the Beatles and a lot of the stuff that we've seen through the years and their music. Part two was George as a solo performer, but it was almost very much about his spirituality. The Maharishi and what he was in terms of his religion. And when I watched Judd's documentary, it was very much the same. What you saw in episode one ended with its Garry Shandling show. Episode two, and I'm ruining nothing by saying this, yeah, there's the Larry Sanders Show, which was a bona fide hit, seen by so many more people because it was on HBO. But when that ended, Garry didn't do a hell of a lot of work anymore. He didn't appear in Las Vegas. He was didn't do concerts. He didn't do another TV show. And you'll see that he spent a lot of time trying to find himself, trying to be at peace with the fact that he was living in this world.
Yeah. I'm going now to Jack Weiss, who says, although you eschewed anything lurid in the book, did you by chance write a chapter or two with all the naughty bits intact for a posthumous publication, asking for a friend?
Asking for a friend?
That's what he says.
Well, okay, Jack Weiss. What I tried to do with this book is to have my memory speak, and I could have gotten into more lurid stuff. I could have gotten into gossip. I certainly didn't want to do that, and I stayed away from it. I do go into the book on certain sketches that had to deal with. It was a sketch that took literally 4 years to get on. It was the summer of '76. It was the bicentennial summer. I was out in Los Angeles it was after the first year, so it's the summer between years for season 1 and season 2. And I was doing a Beach Boys special. Lorna was producing a Beach Boys special for NBC, and Aykroyd and Belushi were in it, and we wrote it. And one night, I went over Al Franken. He and his partner, Tom Davis, had rented a house in Laurel Canyon. And we were just, there was a barbecue, and we were talking about the upcoming season. And I said, listen, what if we did a sketch where through history, anybody who had something named after them was at this party? So the Earl of Sandwich, okay, and Lord Chesterfield, the coat, and and later the cigarette, anybody. And then I can't remember who said it. I thought I did, but Tom Davis wrote a book and said that he said it for him, okay? Where he said, so I said, let's make a list of all these people who had things named after them. And Tom said, how about Lord and Lady Douchebag? Okay. So we went back in September and we wrote the Lord and Lady Douchebag sketch, and the censors would not let us get it on. Not let us say douchebag, not us do, okay. So that was season 2. Beginning of season 3 was rejected again. Season 4, rejected. The last show of the 5th season, which was the last show that Lorne did before he left the show. He came back, obviously. But the Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Belushi, me, Gilda, this crowd, this was our last show of the 5th season before we would all disperse. We got the Lord and Lady Douchebag sketch on the air. And I think I tell about that in the book. I don't know what Jack Weiss wants me to tell. Go for a walk and I can spill my guts, but impressed.
Nice. Marilyn from Houston says, Sarah Silverman said, if you don't look back on the things you've done or said and don't cringe, then you're not growing. Alan, when you look back, is there something you said, wrote, or did in your comedy career that you now cringe over?
Oh, God, yes. And I go into detail about it in the book. After this Garry Shandling show ended, I was hot in the TV business. CBS had just signed Ryan O'Neal and Farrah Fawcett to a deal where they were going to have a show created for them. And they asked me to do it. And the last thing that I wanted to do was create a show for Farrah Fawcett and Ryan O'Neal. In the past, I had been asked to run Bill Cosby show. I turned it down and it was a huge hit. When I was doing its Garry Shandling show, the same production company, Carsey Werner, wanted me to come and create a show for Roseanne Barr. And Roseanne was a big hit. I turned it down. So I'm going, there was a difference between having a prime time network hit, and my success was late night and it was cable.
Sure.
Um, so I go, oh God. And my manager, Bernie Brillstein, said, you can write your own ticket if you have a network hit. So I said, okay. And I agreed to do it. And I would bolt upright in bed in the middle of the night. My wife, Robin, would say, you don't want to do this show. You haven't slept since you said, yes, you're going to do it. And it was a nightmare. We did it, I want to say 1991 or two. And all the people who worked on it, including myself, are just now getting back on solid food. They were terrible. They were not funny. And I assembled the writing staff. There were like 12 or 15 Emmys in the writer's room. The supporting cast had a bunch of Tony Awards, but it was one of those network situations where a series existed because of the stars. And the reason it failed was because of the stars. So yeah, that one isn't going to be high on my resume when I die. I don't want that in the obit.
Caitlin from Indianapolis asks, what Saturday Night Live writers and or performers do you like who you have not worked with?
Oh, that's a wonderful, wonderful question. I think Kate McKinnon is a gift from God.
Wonderful.
She could have been in the cast in any era. I haven't even met her. I watch the show all the time. I like Cecily Strong.
Yeah.
I've not met, or I may have met her at a party, but I don't know her. But I would love to write for her. There were guys like, I was lucky. I wrote for Lovitz. I wrote stuff for Dennis Miller, certainly for Martin Short and Billy Crystal. I'm going through. I'm friendly with Chris Guest. I never wrote for him. That would have been fun, I think. I never wrote for Tina Fey or Amy Poehler. I'm a fan of Rachel Dratch's. So since I left the show, there's been a slew of people who not only were on the show, I never wrote for Will Ferrell, who I would love to somehow, some way write for.
Yeah, I mentioned before my fandom for the show, and you talked about with the original assembling of the show. I think it's still the greatest strength is the variety of voice that you get even within one episode.
Well, you had a guy like in the writers, Michael O'Donoghue. He founded the National Lampoon. You had Rosie Schuster, who was really funny in a quirky kind of way. Marilyn Suzanne Miller, she wrote the softer pieces that went on at 10 to 1 in the morning, okay? I was this big Jewish joke writer, so they came to me for those kind of laughs. Franken and Davis, they wrote all the political things when I was there. And then we were joined by another writer named Jim Downey, so yeah, people came at life from a different direction.
This is we'll see about this one. Fran Miller asks, did you know Irma Bombeck?
No, I never met Irma Bombeck. They've asked me to speak at some of those conferences that they have in Dayton, Ohio, and I have, and I enjoy going there. But before I give my speeches, they have me have dinner seated with her surviving kids. So all the people who are still alive from the Bombeck family I eat with, but Irma's not there. No.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Oh, Andrea Miller, I agree with her. She says, buy the book, so many more great stories.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's chock full of stories. I think about as we're talking, there's a wonderful story in there. Rob Reiner has a screening room on his property, he and his wife, Michelle, and he shows movies every Sunday night. And because he's Rob, he can usually get somebody from the movie. So when we have dinner afterwards, it's like a master class, So this one particular night, the movie, he didn't show a movie, he showed clips, your show of shows, and from Sid Caesar's Hour.
Yeah.
Which was, this was mid or late 90s. So the guests of honor were Carl Reiner, not a hard call for Rob to make, it was his father, right? Mel Brooks, Larry Gelbart, and Sid Caesar himself. And I was in awe. This was all of our heroes right there. At the kids' table, me and my wife, Robin, Tom Hanks and his wife, Rita Wilson, Larry David and his then wife, Lori, Billy Crystal and his wife, and I think Lovitz came by himself, I'm pretty sure. I made sure that when I was showing these clips, this is 50 years later, pardon me, 45-ish years later, what these guys who are all sitting in the back row, I'm in the row in front of them, and I'm leaning back and I'm eavesdropping because I want to hear. Think about the bodies of work that were behind me. Think about the movies, the Broadway shows, the 2,000-Year-Old Man albums. Mel Brooks created Get Smart with my friend Buck Henry. So the bodies of work that were behind me, I was wondering what it would be like for them to go down memory lane and look at old movies. And I heard things like one of them saying, oh yeah, Woody, meaning Woody Allen, wrote that sketch. And then somebody else would say, yeah, but Doc Simon, Neil Simon gave him the joke about came and gave him the joke about the wallet. 45 years and so many works later, they were able to footnote it. And afterwards, we had dinner with Wolfgang Puck. And because Rob is Rob, it was the actual Wolfgang Puck. It wasn't just Wolfgang Puck food. Wolfgang Puck made us dinner, and we're all seated like cross-legged underneath a low table. And we were asking them thousands of questions, like it was a master class. And what I was struck by was arguably of those guys that I mentioned, Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, and Larry Gelbart, their careers only got better after they left your show of shows. One could say that Sid Caesar, that was the acme of his career. But whatever questions we asked, in deference to the man who gave them their breaks, they took the questions and deflected it. So it was answered by Sid. Sid, you remember that thing, and then Sid would give the answer. It was such reverence that they gave him. And I remember the next day, one of Rob Reiner's kids had a birthday party. So we drove up with our children. And as we were getting out of the car, Carl Reiner pulled in right behind us. And I went up to Carl and I said, how was last night for you guys? Because for us, it was like we died and went to heaven. And he put his arm around me and he said, Alan, what you kids did for Sid, you gave him 10 more years of life. And, you know, I remembered that. I that kind of reverence, that kind of gratitude. Hey, you found me when I wasn't doing anything and I'm here where I am because of you, comedically, and I have a nicer car than maybe I would have had in creative liberties and such. So yeah, the book's got lots and lots of stories about the process and who I know, things with Billy Crystal and things with Martin Short, and funny stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I really like this question that comes from Freda from Rochester. It says, what one thing do you wish actors would do differently when receiving a script?
Wow. I would like them to lie. I would like them to get the script, call you next day and say, this is the best thing I've ever read in my life. Wow. And then start giving you notes, okay? Don't lead with, you know something? I don't know. Don't whine. Just lie to me, okay?
All right. Amy from Laguna Beach asks, would you ever consider teaching a master class?
Yes, I would love to. I've had the occasion on a couple of college places, like University of Buffalo, where I went, Quinnipiac in Connecticut. I was up there for a week, and a couple of other places where they gave me a week with a bunch of students, and we'd start on Monday with nothing, And then by Friday night, we had, we shot and edited, let's say a 10-minute pilot. You know what I mean? Or I'd have the kids bring something that they're working on, like a sketch or a short story, and we all share it. You keep a small group, and by the end of the week, it's better than it was when they first came in. So the answer to that question is yes. I would, given the opportunity, I would love to do that.
Patty from Texas wants to know who your favorite comedian is now.
Wow, Patty from Texas. I would have to say that it's a, if you're talking about stand-up comic as opposed to, you know, a comic actor, you know, the Kate McKinnons of the world, it's hard for me to think of one because, look, of the people my age, Larry David still makes me laugh as much as he always did, as does my friend Martin Short and Billy Crystal. If you go a little younger than me, there's the Sarah Silverman crowd, all right, which is like a half a generation younger than me. If you go a full generation younger than me, John Mulaney,
Yeah.
be raw. I think he's a genius. Okay, there's something about, he does a thing about Trump. I don't know if you're familiar with it. He does 10 minutes on Donald Trump, but never uses Trump's name.
Yeah.
He likens it to a horse being in a hospital. Something being in some place that is, it doesn't belong, and it's really funny. So yeah, I would say there's another guy named Mike Birbiglia who I'm
Yeah.
a fan of. So, you know, but they, and I'm good friends with both of them. If I'm now 70, they're half a life younger than me, you know.
Yeah. Hey, Jerry Fox. Oh, he just moved here. I'm sorry. 1 second. Jerry Fox says in high school, Alan was even funnier than he was funny looking. Still is.
Well, I honestly had to thank Jerry Fox for that. I'm speechless.
Eileen says, I spent summers in the Catskills and remember Toady Fields very well. Did you ever meet her? Who else became
Yes.
well-known comedians from the Catskills? We love you in Miami. Can't wait until you return to the Alper JCC.
Oh yeah, I love that JCC. I love the people there. Toady Fields, she was this. She was like, she was a huge hit. She used to be on the Ed Sullivan Show a lot, and she. We used to go there when I was. My mom and dad would take us up to the Catskills on holiday weekends. You know, Labor Day weekend, Memorial Day, and somebody like Toady Fields was a star at that point. But she had started in the Catskills, and she was a heavier woman, and she talked about, you know, the life as a heavier woman. And years later, when I wrote for a lot of those comedians that I met, that I saw up at the Catskills, I was 14. I used to sneak in to the nightclubs because they wouldn't let you in, right? And I started writing for those guys. A couple of them became the opening acts for Toady Fields. So I met her during those times. Just a little side story about that. She had a manager named Howard Hinderstein. And the week that I got the job on Saturday Night Live, this is April of 1975, okay? Lauren said, okay, I'd like you to be one of the original writers. This man, Howard Hinderstein, called me up. He was a manager and he managed Toady and some other people. He called me to tell me that I had gotten a job. As fate would have it, I'm working in a deli. Now I've got two job offers, one from this Saturday Night Live thing. The one that Howard was calling about was, he got me a job writing the questions and bluff answers for Paul Lynde on the Hollywood Squares. Now, it sounds absurd in retrospect. I can't even get these words out of my mouth. But back in 1975, Hollywood Squares was a bona fide hit going into its ninth season. It was on the West Coast where the whole industry is, prime time, which was a higher pay scale. You had all these stars in the boxes, all of whom had Las Vegas acts, all of whom had variety shows of their own, this would be a good entree into the business. Whereas this Saturday Night Live thing, 11:30 to 1 on Saturday night, who's watching television? Angry people who can't get laid. They're angry because they're not getting laid. They're watching television. Who wants to? And who's John Belushi and all of that? And I thought about it for maybe a second and a half and turned down the Hollywood Squares. And I remember that manager saying to me, "It's the biggest mistake I'll ever make in my life." I'm glad he was wrong.
Yeah. Did you fire that manager?
No, he wasn't mine. He was he was Toady Field's manager. But at that point, I was tempted to hire him and then fire him. Yes.
All right. We've got Max Frankel says, I am a screenwriter, improviser, and stand-up from Kansas City. What advice do you have for writers and performers who aren't working in a large market? Do we have to leave behind our nice rents for uncertainty and poverty?
Well, that's a very dramatic way to put it. The fact is, yeah, you look, here's the irony of the whole thing. You can write wherever your head and your hands are, okay? And if you're a storyteller, I'm sure that there are places in Kansas City, he said?
Yeah.
I'm sure they have comedy clubs where you can hone your craft and get on stage. There will come a reality, okay, where you may have to leave Kansas City, all right? You may have to go to New York. You may have to go to LA because that's where the industry is. Now, with the internet, it's easier. It's easier to do it remotely. You can put yourself on tape and you can upload it, and that becomes your resume. That becomes your audition, if you will. So it is easier. That being said, eventually, Mel Brooks once told me, look, if you're going to be a coal miner, you might have to move to West Virginia because that's where the coal is. And it's the same thing. So my suggestion would be is to really hone your craft, become as good a writer as you possibly can in Kansas City. And when it comes time to sell your wares, to sell yourself as a performer, to sell your script, yeah, try to find an agent who works in New York or works in LA, okay? And they can represent you, but eventually you're gonna probably have to go where the coal mines are. And you can become really successful and then move back to Kansas City on your own terms.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, we are reaching the end of our time for the live broadcast here. Yeah, I know. I do want to say, Alan, on behalf of everybody watching and the JCCs of Indianapolis, Dallas, Houston, Miami, and Rochester, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I want to say hi to everybody there. And I look forward to seeing you all in person whenever we're allowed to.
Yeah, I'd like to tell everybody watching to check the JCC Indie Arts Facebook page, and I'm sure the other JCCs as well for more programs that they have scheduled. Check those out and come back. If you are part of the VIP reception, please stay with us. And for the rest of us, we'll see you next time. Thank you very much. I'm Isaac Lamford. He's Alan Zweibel. Buy his book. Good night.